The question is, how much money should you keep in the bank or hold cash in the hand in this current environment? Welcome to African Boys. Join the community and do consider subscribing to this channel. A friend of mine used to keep a huge amount of money well wrapped up in the freezer. It wasn't such a bad idea at the time because there was practically no inflation and no depreciation of the currency. Unless the house caught fire, then he would have lost his money. Otherwise, I did not think a thief would have guessed where he kept his money. The South African rand, Ghana cedis, Kenyan shilling, Libyan dinar, and many other currencies in Africa are currently somehow volatile. There is high inflation rate and depreciation of these currencies. No one's sure how long this is going to last, but there is in fact a light at the end of the tunnel. However, for now, the current environment is what it is. These are economically challenging times world over. In this tough environment, it is important to revisit some basic principles of personal finance. We are all aware of one of the most important basic principles of personal finance, that is saving money. Easier said than done in this current environment. Just a word before I continue. It is very important that each one of us concentrate on their own personal financial literacy journey and do what is right for you. But I'd like to share some thoughts and observations on this journey as I learn my personal finances. Unfortunately, basic principles of personal finances are not taught in our schools in Africa. Frankly speaking, even in America or most of the world, they don't teach personal finance in their schools either. So I never had any of my teachers encouraging us to save money before we spent it at school. But yet, this is fundamental to financial discipline. Save before you spend. But the reason I'm talking finances today is that most personal finance literacy is exclusively tailored towards the Western world. So my intention is to try to apply this personal finance literacy learning to the African context as I learn it and share some tips on this journey to achieving financial goals. What is causing all this volatility of African economies? It is obviously a global problem. Professor P.L. Lumumba of Kenya, Africa's eminent Pan-Africanist, quotes this saying regularly: when America coughs, Africa sneezes.
Foreign Relations Committee, I was chairman of the African Affairs Subcommittee and got to spend a lot of time in Africa. I visited almost all of your countries.
Which means that whatever happens in the USA affects Africa in a profound way. In a global economy, the same can be said of Europe, now China. In Africa, despite the old age puzzle, we have everything we need on the continent. We are still heavily reliant on the West, now increasingly China. However, this time the high cost of living complaint is common. They are complaining about it in the USA, Germany, UK, Australia, and the rest of the first world. Asia is complaining, so it is not unique to Africa. However, according to the World Bank, Africa is home to about 33 of the underdeveloped countries. That's nearly 2/3 of the continent, mostly concentrated in the sub-Saharan Africa. So our economies are especially vulnerable to external elements compared to the first world economies. The COVID-19 pandemic, then the war in the Ukraine, disrupted supply chains, and climate change have all affected underdeveloped countries massively. African households are doing it tough. This in turn increases the pressure and reliance on the African diaspora to send remittances home. Until recently, the world has been on the verge of a recession. Inflation has been high. Interest rates have continued to rise as the central banks attempted to slow down economies and the spending. Now, the whispers are that it appears we might have avoided a global recession. Interest rises have been paused in many Western countries, including the USA, Australia, and many others, and the economies appear to slow down. This was the light at the end of the tunnel I was talking about as I said they cough, we sneeze. Former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister of Singapore, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, commenting on Singapore's economic miracle, that is from being a poor, small, hopeless nation to an economic giant on the world stage within a generation, he attributed the rise of Singapore to attitude of the mind, which he described as turning your permanent disadvantages into advantages. From an African point of view, we start with tremendous disadvantages from where our economies are. But the attitude of the mind is very fundamental to progress, the courage to turn permanent disadvantages to advantages, hence this episode. So in personal finance, as I said, it is strongly recommended to save before you spend. I'm assuming you have a job or a business. For the Africans in the diaspora and those on the mother continent, the principles is the same. If you have a steady source of income, ensure that all your essentials are paid first once you get your wage or your money. Rent, food, mortgage, transportation, and pension or retirement fund. Retirement funds are normally compulsory in most countries. Therefore, that portion of money is deducted when your money hits the bank. For Africans who are on the continent, saving money in the business as usual sort of way may not be possible for now due to high inflation rates, which in turn means goods and services are vulnerable to price fluctuations or price rises. Money is losing value so fast. Therefore, you may think that you're saving money by keeping your money in the bank, but you're essentially losing out due to inflation. I'm not suggesting that you abandon saving money completely, but there are options or maybe better ways to utilize the value of your money. Obviously, there are risks in all these suggestions. Ensure that due diligence is done. The first option I'm looking at is real estate in Africa. This sector is completely taking off. So if you're in Africa or you're even outside the country, consider investing in there. Whether you add value to your property or you're increasing your portfolio, houses in Africa appreciate. The value of your property should increase as well. Africa has an added advantage that it is not yet built up like the West or China. So there is a huge amount of growth to occur still. And also the other option is to invest in commodities. And what are commodities? These are raw materials, gold, silver, precious minerals, which are plenty in Africa. I know that sometimes the infrastructure for investment is not there, but in some countries the infrastructure is there and you are able to invest in those sectors. Could invest in the agriculture sector, which is completely taking off with products such as cattle, corn, donuts, etc. Also in energy, oil and gas, and then you've got solar and everything. So there are all these areas that you can invest and that are taking off in Africa, better than keeping the money in the bank. The other option is consider buying stock that pays dividends, like say for instance Coca-Cola or Apple. If you know how to invest in the S&P 500 index fund, which is much easier. Also look into the South African Stock Exchange, which is the largest in Africa. Do your homework there before you invest, but I think that's an area also to consider. There is also another option of opening USA dollar account that is offered in many banks in Africa. The only drawbacks to this is that you pay a high service fee, which may not be worth the trouble. You gotta really have plenty of money to justify these kind of accounts. And what is important, please, is to work on your own personal journey and make your own choices after due diligence. Everyone's journey is different, remember that, and please leave a comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are on today's discussion. I'll see you in my next video.